Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Around the Bird Bath. As always, I'm your host, Dan Nerdahl, and coming to you for the very first Tuesday reaction podcast where myself and hopefully a guest break down the Tuesday game. Sometimes we'll kind of get into the season as a whole and project out a little bit based on like the Tuesday game, or the midweek game. I think this season all of them are on Tuesday. Um, like what the rest of the season might look like or what it can mean for the rest of the season. So not exclusively just the Tuesday game, but that will be our main focus. And obviously, the very first Tuesday game of the season didn't go as well as we would have all liked for the Roadrunners, dropping the walk-off loss to Tarleton State, 14-10. And the reason it was 14-10 it was tied up when the grand slam was hit. You if you probably know that by now, either by watching or just checking the score. But I had the opportunity to have Stephen Whitaker on. Stephen is very familiar to the San Antonio and UTSA sports community, very active on Twitter covering various San Antonio and UTSA sports. Also a guest of the podcast. While this is his first time on Around the Bird Bath, he has been on Alamo Audible before, talking with Jared and Adrian. I think most recently it was a guest appearance talking about media day for football back in the fall. And so I had a really good conversation with Stephen. Always enjoy talking to him. And he brings a great historical and just journalistic rich approach to his coverage and talking about UTSA athletics, specifically in this case, UTSA baseball. So really enjoy talking to Stephen. Looking forward to the rest of the season. Hopefully you all as the listeners enjoy these pieces. Um, we'll either record them Tuesday night, maybe sometime on Wednesday at the latest. Sometimes it might be good to have a night to sleep on it, on the thoughts, and try to be a little more objective and optimistic about the thoughts. But hopefully most weeks we'll have good things to say and good breakdowns and good reactions to bring you. As a reminder, still rolling with um, the weekend recap blogs that we hope to drop, Sunday evening, Monday at some point each week, discussing the past weekend series. And then by doing this reaction podcast, kind of stop putting the Tuesday stuff in the blog. And it was just getting a lot by the end of the week to try to cover and recap moments from 6-7 days ago, depending on the week and everything. And so I'm hoping that you enjoy this. I hope that it brings kind of a fresh spin on coverage for you as the listeners. And before we cut over to the conversation with Stephen, just want to take a moment and thank our Patreon board of trustees and big money donors. And so, board of trustees, Digiteek, John Outwell, Gary and Ruben, representing the UTSA Bird Gang Tailgate, Ray Redding and Meet Me Apparel, Brandon Grell and the Grell Realty Group, Andy Elizalde and Profession Benefit Solutions, Ian McClendon and SYCR LLC, Ryan Squires, Waterman Construction, Javon Townsend, VP of the DFW chapter of the UTSA Alumni Association, UTSA Annual Giving, and one of our newest board trustees sponsors who are also sponsoring all of our podcasts for the month of February, Artisan Vapor and CBD. And so Jared and Adrian have talked at lengths about what you can get from them and having them on as a sponsor, and very appreciative of their support. And just a plug, if you have a business out there, or if you want to be a monthly sponsor, take on a month like Artisan did, you might think, oh, I found Alamo Audible through football coverage or through some summer coverage. With baseball, we are bringing you that coverage almost 12 months out of the year. And so no lapses in getting your ad space out and getting your product out there and getting your company out there as an advertising space. So if that's something you're thinking about, you can reach out to Jared. Email at alamoaudible.com. I think it might still be alamodomeaudible.com, but send them a message on Twitter, send them an email, and ask how you can do that. And we appreciate all the support. And then, of course, our big money donors, Ben Tovar, the Bunch family, Zach Espuerqueta, and the San Antonio Podcast Network, Alejandro Benavides, Jacob Cavazos, board president of the UTSA Alumni Association, Rick Cortez of Rowdy Road Grillers, Brandon Padron, John Nally, and Home Field Apparel, where you can use the discount code UTSA Wants Home Field for 15% off your first purchase or 10% off for returning customers. That supports us at Alamo Audible and our partnership with the Dave Campbell's Republic of Football. And from what Jared has hinted, maybe hold on to that code just a little bit longer, as there's rumors that home field for UTSA might be around the corner. We'll see. But once again, thank you for your support on Patreon. Going to still be dropping at some point this week the series preview. It's not really series because of the Sugarland College Classic, but a quick little breakdown of SFA, Creighton, and Lamar, who UTSA will face this weekend. First up on the docket is SFA Friday afternoon. So if you're in the Houston area, Sugarland area, you have a chance to head over to Constellation Field at some point this weekend, catch some UTSA baseball. Great opportunity for our Houston area supporters. But without further ado, we'll cut over to that interview with Stephen. And as always, thanks for listening. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Around the Bird Bath, and it is the very first episode of, we don't have a catchy title yet, but we'll just call it Talking About Tuesday, where I break down the Tuesday game, and I'm hopefully going to bring on a guest every week, whether somebody who covers UTSA sports, a former player, maybe another fan, and just talk about their thoughts about the game. And very excited to have a friend of the podcast, Stephen Whitaker, for the first episode. Stephen's been on Alamo Audible before. He's a UTSA alum. He's a alum of writing for the Paisano. He also, in his free time, writes for Express News. Main writing is UTSA Rivals and also my San Antonio Sports. So, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. How about you?
Not too bad. I was hoping yesterday would be a little bit of redemption, and we saw some offense that we were looking to see, but unfortunately, still some question marks with the pitching. What were some things you were hoping to see after the weekend series against UT Arlington? What were some of the things you were hoping to see them do against Tarleton State yesterday?
Well, I was really hoping for a pitcher's duel. That would have been, like a 3-2 or a 2-1, but that it's hard to have that when you fall behind 8-2 early. But I liked how they fought back from down 8-2, and then even they had I think the 10-8 lead in the seventh inning, and so you thought maybe they were going to roll into Stephenville and come away with some good barbecue and a win. I hope they still got the good barbecue, but they did not come away with the win. Mainly, I think Howell is the one from Tarleton State that he hit a 2-run homer to tie it and then hit a walk-off grand slam. And so it was kind of one of those games where, the final score, it's a shootout, but then you're like, well, yeah, but there were some positives, the coming back from down 6 runs, which I am not a professional baseball player in any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think that's conducive to a long-term success of, falling behind multiple runs. I guess if you do it early enough, you have enough time to come back. But I mean, we saw that Friday with the UT Arlington game where they jumped on UTSA. I think it was 9-0. And so that's one thing I think, and I'm sure Hallmark would also think that's something to work on is, the falling behind early. Which, and again, maybe last night was a case of, sometimes, Tarleton State, maybe it was just they had a good night hitting, and you're going to have that sometimes. Um, but that is something that you want to work on as the season progresses, is trying to limit those big run innings of, 4 runs or more. And so, all in all, I think it was a good game for the neutral. But I think both Hallmark and the Tarleton coach are probably checking their hairs this morning to see how many fell out from the stress of that one. And I'm sure the pitchers are also, for both sides, are also wondering, how do we figure out how to not give up so many runs?
Yeah, and I didn't realize I saw it this morning. A Texas baseball account posted this, and I saw it. But for Howell, so you mentioned already he had the 2-run home run to tie it, and then the grand
Hmm.
slam to win it. And those were from opposite sides of the plate. The first
Yeah.
one was from the right side of the plate. The second one was from the left. And and Tarleton, like I mentioned this to someone on Twitter and to a few friends, but I mean, they do have a smaller ballpark. They used to be D2. They're kind of in that
Hmm.
D1 transition state. I don't know if that's why they have a smaller park or just they want to be a hitter's park, but it's
Well,
it's just 320 down the
it's
lines.
it's also, they have one of the main roads of town in left
Mm-hmm.
field. And so I think it was kind of one of those, when they were D2, it made sense to have that short fence. And then over time, the ballpark got built up. And so now I guess it's kind of a case of, well, if we want a larger outfield, we're going to have to move the stands, we're going to have to move home plate back a little bit. And I think, they just did a renovation at the ballpark that it's now up to 1,000 seats. So either they're going to have to figure out how to put a tunnel, how to put the road like in a tunnel underneath and expand left field, or they're just going to be stuck with 320, which I would like to point out is they had a smaller outfield dimension than the baseball field where I went to high school,
Yeah.
which at Lufkin it was 330 down the lines. And I think if I remember correctly, center field was about 390 or 400. So it was about the same center field. But so I mean, it's a park that you can tell it was a hitter's park. And I got a feeling that if you look at Tarleton's home schedule the rest of the season, there's going to be a lot of games there that are, 10-8 or 12-11, or just because, both teams are dealing with the same scene, I guess, or same ballpark dimensions. And I mean, you saw it last night. There were some UTSA hits that would be outs at Roadrunner Field that cleared the fence at
Mm-hmm.
Tarleton. And so I think, yeah, it's a case of, it's a D2 school that 4 years ago moved up. And then the fact that they did put the field flush up against one of the main roads of town. So now it would take either an act of God or an act of Congress for them to expand their left field, because you're going to have to either tunnel the road or move the stadium a few feet one way. And I think, they could do like a contortionists, like the old like Fenway Park, where it has the short right field and then kind of a long left field. Do kind because I they do have some trees out there in right field that I guess if they wanted to expand right field, that would probably, and then you just have, it'd be like Minute Maid, where all the right-handed hitters love going there because you'd have the Stephenville edition of the Crawford boxes.
Yeah, for sure. And they do kind of compensate that a little bit by having the higher wall.
Yeah,
Although it's not padded, and you saw that
no,
yesterday as first it was Mason Lytle that ran into the wall, and then a Tarleton player.
yeah.
And despite the recommendation from NCAA to have all all exposed playing surfaces padded, they've not gone that route. And I imagine it would not be UTSA has seen this themselves with facilities and everything. It's not the cheapest
Yeah.
fix to repad your entire outfield wall,
And I
especially when
imagine,
you want to keep that extra height.
yeah, and I imagine when you've just spent whatever they spent on the renovations to the rest of the stadium, that I'm sure they have padded wall on the list of to do, but money's not growing on trees these days for these colleges, and so
Mm-hmm.
you have to. pick and choose what I mean, you see it with UTSA baseball where we we sure would like a bigger ballpark, but what they've done this offseason is compared to what it was is a night and day improvement. And so it's just, one of those incremental things that like not everyone can be Houston overnight. I mean, they've done this for decades. And so and that's what I tell friends that, I mean, I want the best for UTSA, but unless we found someone with Tillman Fertitta money, it's not going to happen overnight. And if anyone's willing to offer me their winning Powerball ticket where I could then have the Fertitta level money, um, that's about the only way I know for it to get done is you need someone with deep pockets and a willingness to spend from those deep pockets. And I think also getting back to how we think the year's going to go, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if somehow they made a NCAA tournament and were able to, let's say, make a super regional, that's some more money and your name is recognized more. And so then you would be seeing more investment in the program. I mean, just, look at football before Traylor got here. No one outside of San Antonio really knew much about UTSA, but if you get good enough and you get enough national TV games, and that's also being in the American, I think will help with all the sports, is you get the recognition of, maybe it's on ESPN Plus, but we saw the top play on Saturday was I forget who it was, made that diving, the Jeter-esque catch down the foul line.
Matt King.
And so that's something that, like in the old days when we were on Stadium with Conference USA, someone would have had to have submitted that to Sports Center and said, hey, check this out. But by being on ESPN Plus and that recognition, someone at ESPN was sitting there watching all the games on ESPN Plus and was like, hey, that was a good play. Let's keep that one. And so that's, I think, eventually we'll get to the point where that's, our stadium is big enough that you can host a super regional and not have to call the missions and say, hey, are you in town? If not, great. And in Tarleton, they're at the lower end of that spectrum. They're kind of where we were 10 years ago, where they've just moved up. Although we were D1 the whole time, ours was moving conferences. Theirs is a complete move up to D1. And so, they're still in that phase across all their sports where it's like a growing pains of, this is how we did it at D2, but we're D1 now. So we have to, maybe we look into seeing how we can pad the left field or the outfield walls, or maybe we talk to the city about, what can we do moving or adjusting our dimensions. But I think, having been there to Stephenville a couple of times, it is a great city and the people really love their Texans, both the state and the school. And so I think as they grow, that's going to be a place where, people say, hey, that's a good place to go. You can catch a baseball game. And then there's plenty of good places to eat around there. And it's a nice campus. So it's going to be a draw to people as they get it going.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the reasons why, the series record between the two teams is just now, after last night, 4-3, still in favor of UTSA because they just didn't move up a few years back. And if you look at the box score and if you look at the final score, you see 14-10. Obviously not ideal, giving up 14 runs, all of which were earned. But the ninth inning, the first batter of the ninth inning hit a pop fly, and unfortunately, and if for those listening, if you watched the game, you kind of saw the limited bird's eye view camera angle. So I wasn't able to quite see what happened there with Brock Palmer and why that kind of hit his glove and fell out. Maybe the wind was blowing in still and just kind of hard to play, dark and the lights are shining down on you. But a crucial mistake because it extended the at bat for the hitter, he got a single, and then the next batter you're pitching him different because they only need
Yeah.
one run because it's a tie game. So now all of a sudden
Yeah.
you're starting to think small ball situational. So
And you're
Ryan
trying to
Moore
get
gives
a
up the
double
walk.
play.
Yeah, you get the double play, and then once he walks the batter, now you're really in trouble because now you just bunt sack fly, and
Hmm.
that's just where And then of course they hit the drag bunt right down the line, and it kind of looked like, and I don't know for sure, it wouldn't have. I don't think it would have made a difference with Howell and just the night he had, but it kind of looked like Matt King was going to play it, and then Ryan Ward kind of interfered or got his way just a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the bad camera angle, but just a rough sequence there in the ninth, and just kind of one of those things where the bounces just went their way, and the
Yeah.
Lady Luck kind of went their way, but
Well, I
I
mean,
mean, yeah.
and they scored 14 runs on 12 hits.
Mm-hmm.
So that was some of it was their doing, and then there were, also the UT, walks are never good if they're compounded with hits.
Mm-hmm.
And then for UTSA, one thing to look at is they left five guys on base, and if you bring in, any number of those, you're not tied in the ninth inning to where they but then you also think, Tarleton also left three on base, so it's kind of that cancel each other out. Um, but I think all in all, it was just their bounces went in their favor, and UTSA's bounces didn't, and that's when they're even at at this level, even teams in the WAC, they're going to have players that are talented enough that on any night, if the bounces don't go your way, you're not going to win the game. And you could have Nolan Ryan on the mound, but if they're hitting him around the yard, he had bad games in his career, and they're not really talked about because he had so many good ones. But that's just that's baseball one night. And I mean, maybe when they come back to San Antonio in March, it's a different story, and the bounces go UTSA's way, and everyone's talking about how great the UTSA was on Tuesday night. And it's baseball, you can't predict it. You just have to live through it.
Yeah, and I think the big question right now, obviously there was big expectations coming into the season off of last year, and it looked like, and they're still doing well, like individually in a lot of ways, some of these players, but it looks like Coach Hallmark and his staff did a nice job of hitting the transfer portal and bringing in some good JUCO guys, even Mason Lytle coming down from Oregon, a Power 5
Mhm.
school, or Power 2, whatever they're calling it now for baseball, but a good program like Oregon. And I think it's at this point, it's kind of like, okay, we're getting in these slugfests with like schools like Tarleton State and UT Arlington. Houston just put up a big, like, lopsided football type score against the team they played yesterday. But it's kind of like, if you're getting in these slugfests, is it just learning the new roster and learning where new guys fit and kind of getting off to a slow start, or like what's it going to look like in a few weeks when you're playing like Grand Canyon, when you're playing East Carolina, and we're not
Yeah.
going to really focus on that right now, but I think we've seen in 5 games, we've seen twice now where UTSA gets behind big early,
Hmm.
and then even the games they've won, that 7-2 game, it was a lot closer than the score
Yeah.
showed, and then they won the walk-off game in just a 2-1. So,
Yeah.
you know, you could very easily be 4-1, or you could very easily be like 1-5 at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. Well, and I think another thing is, they've come close, even their losses, like even last night, they had a chance to win that game.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's this, and I've watched baseball a long time, and what kind of stands out to me is that this is a team that they're still learning, everybody's tendencies. And like last year, and to some degree 2 years ago, Hallmark pretty much knew who his guys were at each position. And so he could roll out there with confidence. Like you saw it last year when they played Houston at Roadrunner Field. And I mean, that was a Tuesday night game. And I forget who was on the mound that night, but Houston was having trouble. I think they didn't get their runs till late. And even then, that was still not enough to prevent it from being a run rule finish. And
Mm.
so I think it's, this year, because there's so many new faces, this is kind of that phase where they're all learning and we're trying to figure out, who is our best option at this spot and who is our best option in this situation. And that's where I think it's good to test themselves against like a UT Arlington or a Tarleton State, because let's say your first get like you look at A&M, they're 4-0. They've been beating McNeese State and UIW. They'd also be 4-0 if they had played UTSA. And UTSA, we wouldn't really have learned much about what we have because you're getting bludgeoned by a power team. But if you open your season with these kind of, not quite level, but closer to your level than the UT or a Tech or an A&M, you're able to have situations where you can say, okay, we need, one run, we have two on. Let's work on our bunting. Let's try to bunt the guy over to second and third. And where, if you're getting blown out, all you're doing is throwing pitchers in there and saying, okay, just get 3 outs. And in the long run, that's not helping you any. And that's where I think, as we look down the road and they do play A&M on a Tuesday, you hope by that point they've had enough games in them that Hallmark is figuring out, who's my best option for shutdown innings on a Tuesday, where I don't have to have a Tarleton State where I'm using weekend guys on Tuesday that I might need as the conference season opens. And so that's where, I think patience is probably going to be a virtue for all of us, because it is such a new team compared to past years. And they still could get to 40 wins, like which is a goal that they've even mentioned. They set that as their goal in the off season. But I don't think it's going to be one of those things like last year where it was, first week of April and they were like, well, how many over 40 will they get?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I can't say for last year if that crept in to the team. I just think it was their schedule at the end was so heavy, backloaded, and you faced Dallas Baptist in the last weekend of the season when they were rolling. So I think it was just kind of the way the schedule worked out, that they had the front load of so many like lower teams in the standings, and then their last series were Louisiana Tech and Dallas Baptist, and by that point, they were getting those teams when they were hot. And so, we'll see as we go down the road how the schedule progresses. But I think in the long run, they'll be better off than they are now. But what we're seeing now is the growing pains of just being so new and not, knowing who goes. Like there's not a Tapia on the lineup this year where you can just say, okay, we know what we're going to get from him. You're still figuring out what you're going to get from Lytle and the other guys, and not to single out anybody, but it's just that's the nature of when you have so many new players. The first week or two is, figuring out who's good at what and who can I trust in these situations.
Yeah, and I mentioned this a few different times now, but last year you had 8 players register at least 45 games played, and the only reason that wasn't a full 9 players was because Shane Stradashny had the injury, and I know everyone would love to get to the point, and maybe at some point we do, where you're kind of that very strong year in and year out mid major where you don't have to have a really really good tournament, and you're relying on winning it, and that's the only way you can get in.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, for a lot of mid majors, it's just not realistic with the current setup and field placement. Maybe they get there at some point. So I think ideally, yeah, you want it. you want to see a lot of wins, and you want to reach that 40 win mark because of what it entails and what it kind of says about your team. But I think even into this year, the best path, or the way you control your own destiny, is by winning the conference tournament and putting it
Yep.
together at the right time. Because you look at going back 2 years ago, I mean, they had the highest RPI in program history at 38. They
Yep.
had beat a number of ranked teams, and then the conference tournament was what it was, and they still got snubbed. So the committee's going to be the committee, and they're going to be in their fields every other each year in a different
Hmm.
way. Um, and that's where, we talk about that consistency, and baseball is a game of momentum, and baseball is a game of consistency. And so putting it together in May when you're playing Wichita State, when you're playing South Florida, when you're going to Clearwater to play the tournament,
Hmm.
and ECU is looking down you at you, and FAU is looking down at you. That's where figuring, like what you were saying, figuring the team out now and kind of working through the kinks now, while it stings to lose on a walk-off grand slam, and it
Hmm.
stings to lose to a team like Tarleton State in the eyes of, like, oh, they're Tarleton State. Focus on what the good that can come from it. And
Yep.
and there was a lot of good things last night. We had more guys get multi-hit games. Uh, Five total. Matt King had a great night. He went 4 for 5
Hmm.
with a double and three singles. Saw some power from Brock Palmer, and just some good base hitting. And what I liked was kind of the aggressive base running too. You saw Mason Lytle that first inning steal second, steal third,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're in position to score on pass ball. So
Yeah.
there's some things to work on with the base running still, but then also, like, a lot of good things. If Mason can have that speed, and if he can get his bats to come around, then he can be a real weapon on the base pads.
Yeah. And I mean, and the same, how they lost on Sunday, where the miscommunication on the base paths, that's something that eventually they'll work that out. And I'm sure that
Mm-hmm.
was on their film study on Monday. I'm sure that was the first thing they discussed was, don't get too far off of whatever base you're on, regardless of the situation, because that's how you turn two on with no outs into one on with two outs. And it can happen faster than you can imagine. And so that's where I think as the year progresses, and who knows, maybe down the road we're going to have a situation where it's bottom of the ninth and we have two on with no outs, down a run, and we end up winning. And people will say, well, it was probably that from that what they learned in that loss to UT Arlington. And again, maybe down the road, maybe let's say, East Carolina, that we're need a walk off grand slam for UTSA against East Carolina, and UTSA is able to do that because they've learned from their losses, and or let's say they're on the road and they need to prevent a walk off grand slam, and they've learned this is what not to do from facing Tarleton. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't if it I'm sure someone wise in history have said your greatest lessons come from losses, and if no one's ever said that, then I'm going to trademark it and get some shirts printed. Um, but it is true that you do learn a lot when you lose. And I've been on my playing career was not long in any stretch of the imagination, but of the sports I played, there were times where I was on teams that weren't any good. And at the time, I didn't think you were learning much, but over time, you realize that, you learn how to handle different situations because you went through that with losing, and even, winning is great, but you also learn what not to do from losing. And so I think that's where the baseball team is now, is they're learning, it's not wise to fall behind 6, 7 runs 2 innings in, but if you do it early enough, there's enough time to come back. And if you're playing teams like UT Arlington or Tarleton, that their pitching is not as great as some of the teams you're going to face, you can come back from that. But I would not recommend falling 6 or 7 runs down against FAU or East Carolina or next week Houston, because we saw Houston walloped Prairie View last night. I think it was like 27-1.
Hmm.
And so that's not one to look forward to next Tuesday because they're going to be angrier than if someone had taken their Frenchie's chicken from them.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the pitching. Last night we saw three of the four pitchers were guys we've already seen this year in either multiple outings if it's Ryan Ward or single outings if it's Braylon Owens and Drake Smith, and
Mm-hmm.
all three of those guys for the most part had been pretty solid up until last night. And again, maybe it's just a combination of just not having the right stuff last night, but none of the four pitchers, and then Connor Miles was the other one making his debut. And I saw a lot of good stuff out of him, and maybe he could have even stayed in there, but you give up a 2-run game tying home run. And I get how Coach Hallmark wants to get his closer in there.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan Ward had been lights out the first weekend of the season. Are you at all concerned with like already kind of recycling some weekend guys on a Tuesday and already putting like a Braylon Owens and a Drake Smith back out there on a
I
midweek game in terms
I
of pitching
think
depth?
I think in the long run it's not conducive to use all like as to use your weekend guys on Tuesdays. I mean, Tuesdays are really designed for trying to just get to the weekend. You want to try to find a guy on your Tuesday pitcher that can go, you know, 6, 7 innings and but I also think that it being the first Tuesday game of the season and the way the game panned out that I think that was just Hallmark reading the situation and saying, we're down 8-2. Who can I send out there that'll eat innings and keep them off the board?
Mm-hmm.
Because they showed last night UTSA can hit when they need to, and if they get in good situations where they have guys on, they can bring them around. So I think it was kind of just the way the game unfolded that he was having to use some of the same guys. I think as the Tuesdays go along, it would be concerning if you start to see, those guys having to keep coming in on Tuesdays. But I think for now, it's kind of a wait and see. And I think it'll depend on next Tuesday at Houston. If UTSA can keep that close for a while, you may not have to cycle through pitchers like you do when you're down so many runs and you're trying to keep the game from flying away from you. So I think we'll have a better idea of what that looks like after next week and as the Tuesdays progress. But for right now, I think it was just it being the first Tuesday and he's still trying to, you know, figure out who works where and I also think, if you can all get your weekend guys to where they're going long innings, like your starters, then your relievers on the weekend, you can kind of be more flexible with them on the Tuesday games because, you
Mm-hmm.
maybe you didn't use Ward at all on the weekend. And so here's a chance for him to get some innings on Tuesday so that he's not going 10 days without action. And so, yeah, I think for right now, not too worried, but as the season progresses, if it's something that becomes, a constant of like the Tuesday games, we're having to use 5 pitchers, then that's going to be where you start, you know, thinking maybe it's the depth
Mm-hmm.
or just the way the season is going. But I think for right now, it's kind of a cautious, this was the first Tuesday game of the season and they're designed for kind of, I guess, experimenting with your pitching and I'm sure, Tarleton State, they're also their equivalent podcast today is worrying about they used too many pitchers last night and why they couldn't put away a really good UTSA team. And it's just, everyone in the country's in the same boat. They're only 4 or 5 games into the season, and most teams are like UTSA have a lot of newcomers that they're trying to figure out, who goes where. And so I think, by March and April, as we get toward the end of the Tuesday games, we'll have a really good idea of, if we're in the situation of, man, we've had to use 5 pitchers each of the last 6 Tuesdays, then that's a reason for concern. But if you get to like, late March and you're like, we've had 5 Tuesdays in a row where our starter went 6 strong, 7 innings, then you're looking at it, well, that's why our weekend series have gone so well because our staff has rested. And so we've been able to, like, if we got into a situation with East Carolina or whoever, you were able to use your bullpen more over the weekend when you needed it for the conference games because your Tuesday guy went so strong. So yeah, for right now, it's kind of a just cautious. Let's
Yeah.
see how the season goes.
Yeah, and one name we obviously didn't see over the weekend and didn't see yesterday, which leads me to believe that and this is my own opinion assumption that he's not 100% still is veteran pitcher Yuli Quiroga.
Yeah.
Was a guy who last year had some really good stuff and definitely that one of those kind of 5+ inning potential guys. And haven't heard anything official, haven't seen anything, just know that like here's a veteran guy. And if anything, okay, so you bring in some new pieces or some guys kind of, maybe leapfrog him in the fall, like a Ruger Riojas or you bring Robert Orlowski in, but especially not to see Yuli on a Tuesday game like that. Maybe he's not 100%. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But he's someone that if he's not healthy, if they can get him healthy, or if they're just trying to ramp him up, maybe he had a late winter and couldn't start his ramp up as soon, and they're just trying to get him ready to go so he doesn't get re-injured. That's somebody that could definitely help with the depth and the leadership of the pitching staff.
Yeah, and if you can get him as your consistent Tuesday, that would get back to, where he can be your guy that you can say, okay, on Tuesday, I just need you to go 6 or 7 innings and we're good. And so, and that might also be helpful for him as he ramp up, that if he's, to push himself once a week as opposed to being a weekend guy, that might also help with his, as he recovers, that he can get more into the flow of things by being the Tuesday guy. And then eventually, as it gets more into the season and you don't have the Tuesday games, then you've got him built to where now he's another weekend guy you can call on when it gets to that point of the season where you're only playing on the weekends, and then you get to the tournament and it's, however many games in 5 days you end up playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So So for those listening, don't definitely things to work on. I mean, Coach Colmark acknowledged that after the weekend, and we can see that anyone watching these games can see that. But don't wave the flag yet. Don't worry yet. Still a lot of season, a lot of time, a lot of opportunities to pad that RPI and build confidence and everything. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on. Any final thoughts? Any last little nuggets before we close this out?
Well, I had tweeted it yesterday, but if Hallmark had won yesterday, that would have been his 111th win as coach at UTSA, which he's currently tied for fourth with the inaugural coach. So if he wins 2 games, or if he wins a game over the weekend, he'll move into fourth. And then he's only 3 wins away from tying the coach that's currently in third on the all-time wins list. So if they go 3-0 at Sugarland, he will move into a tie for third. And because I'm going to just put all positivity out there, if they go 4-0 this week, he will move into sole possession of third on the all-time wins list with 114. So that's the mission for them in the Houston area this weekend, is to go 4-0. And we can all come back next week and we'll have forgotten about getting walked off at Tarleton, because they'll have gone 4-0 in the greater Houston area.
Yeah, and all that shows is him and his staff have good Good stuff. He knows baseball. He can coach.
Mhm.
If we have you back on in the middle of the season, hopefully we're not still trying to reach those
Yeah,
milestones. Hopefully we will surpass them, and we're focusing on number two
yeah.
in our sights. And so, big weekend
Which
ahead.
he
Oh,
which
go
he
ahead.
has a while to go for. The second most wins is, I think, 200 and something. So
Okay.
he's got a ways to go once he gets to third.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you everyone for listening. Still dropping this week on our Patreon is my series breakdown of this weekend. They're going to be in Sugarland for the Sugarland College Classic. A little different for more recent fans, where you're not obviously playing the same team all weekend. They're going to play Stephen F. Austin on Friday, Creighton on Saturday, and then finish up with Lamar on Sunday. So good opportunities to kind of shake off some of this rust and shake off some of these bad feelings, and hopefully going into Houston with a lot of momentum and kind of figure out the pitching staff and the hitting as they face a tough Houston team. But Stephen, thanks again, and
Yeah,
I
thanks
hope
for
you have a
having
good
me
rest of
on.
your week.
Same to you.